Growing up is strange. I'm sure that you can remember a time in your life where everything felt easier. Adults just seemed to know what they were doing, and you weren't nostalgic for things, you just enjoyed them. At what point did that change? When did you grow up? When did you change from your past self to yourself? You can almost definitely remember a time before and a time after you changed into the person you are now, but the transition, the specific point of change, is much more difficult to pinpoint. Learning to understand yourself and growing into your personality is something that we all experience throughout our lives. Our experiences shape us into unique individuals with complex and nuanced identities. And yet, the more complex we become, the more difficult it becomes to define ourselves. Ask yourself, who am I? What makes me me? When did I become me? You might struggle to find an answer, and you might find yourself unable to answer altogether. Maybe you'll think back and remember a time when you could define yourself with a simple choice: Bulbasaur, Squirtle, or Charmander. I know this example may not apply to everybody, but if you were born in the 90s, there's a very good chance you can answer that question in a heartbeat. You can answer it because you remember your childhood experiences playing Pokémon Red and Blue, and however small a part it played in your life, no matter how little you think about it now, it's a part of who you are today. It's a part of your identity. But what if you didn't have a childhood? What if you had no memories of the past on which to build your personality and beliefs? Let's talk about Pokémon, the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. In a secret laboratory within a mansion on a volcanic island, scientists work tirelessly in an effort to create new life. By extracting DNA from fossilized remains found all over the world, they are able to resurrect ancient, extinct Pokémon. These Pokémon can be born again as clones in the modern era. The scientists' goals begin purely altruistic for the good of mankind, but in order to fund their work, they enter into a partnership with the evil Giovanni, who is the leader of Team Rocket and overall not a very nice man. Giovanni has only one goal: to overthrow the world using Pokémon. And so, using his vast wealth as leverage, he has the scientists move into a less ethical area of study. The scientists, under Giovanni's leadership, begin experimenting with gene splicing to create more powerful Pokémon. During this time, a fossil containing the remains of the ancient legendary Pokémon Mew is found, and through the scientists' cloning process, they have enough material to resurrect it. However, Giovanni insists that gene splicing and further experimentation is conducted in order to make something even more powerful that he could use to enact his plan for world domination. They dreamed of creating the world's most powerful Pokémon, and they succeeded. During the opening of the movie, we hear Mewtwo's thoughts as he is brought into the world. These questions would go unanswered for much of his life as he is born into confusion and anger. The scientists who created him continued to experiment to determine his power, showing no sympathy or care towards him, and offering no comfort for the existential confusion into which he was born. As his mistrust and anger towards the scientists grew, Mewtwo decided to escape his prison and, being unable to control the anger and overwhelming power bestowed upon him, he destroys the facility that made him, killing his creators. As the wreckage burns around him, Mewtwo is approached by Giovanni, who offers to help control his power and reveal his true purpose. Believing that this human can be trusted, Mewtwo agrees to go with Giovanni and begin training. Intense and cruel experimentation takes place as Mewtwo is augmented with man-made machinery and forced to battle against Pokémon to increase his strength. He learns that he is a clone of Mew, bred to be superior and more powerful than that which he shares his DNA. Becoming more and more powerful, Mewtwo learns to control his abilities, but not the anger that dwells within. He begins to believe that he cannot be defeated by any Pokémon, and wishes for Giovanni to make good on his promise and reveal his true purpose. After years of living as a slave imprisoned by Giovanni, Mewtwo finally learns his true purpose, the real reason for his creation. To be a slave. To answer to Giovanni's every command and act as the ultimate weapon in his plan to overthrow the world. Mewtwo now understands he has been betrayed. His human creators gave him life with only pain, and now the human who had promised to teach him his true purpose and help him had used him for his own selfish means as well. Every human Mewtwo had ever met had caused him pain and wanted nothing but to use him for their own means. This is where things change. Up until this point, Mewtwo, despite what had happened with the scientists, had trusted Giovanni. He held the hope that he would keep his word and treat Mewtwo as an equal, but this betrayal set in stone an undeniable truth. Humans cannot be trusted. Humans are evil and will always betray Pokémon. Alongside this, Mewtwo had seen for his entire life Pokémon acting subservient to humans and choosing to act as their companions when, in Mewtwo's eyes, they were superior to them. As Mewtwo considered humans to be vastly weaker and inferior to himself and other Pokémon, he found this subservience to be illogical and sickening. Mewtwo ultimately decides that humans and the Pokémon that serve them are unworthy to live amongst powerful beings like him, and that a new world must be created where only the strongest may survive. He feels that he has no place in the world of humans, and although he knows that other Pokémon have been able to find purpose as partners to humans, this does not make sense to him, as his experience living with and being betrayed by humans gives him the belief that the Pokémon who choose to live alongside them do so only because they are too weak to do otherwise. Making use of the power he had gained through the evil experimentation and brutal training he had undergone at Giovanni's orders, Mewtwo breaks free once again. He destroys Giovanni's facility and sets out on his own to enact his plan, which he now believes to be his true purpose. Outwardly, Mewtwo's plan to put an end to the age of humanity and bring forth a world where only the strongest Pokémon may survive is ideological, and when viewed through his eyes could make sense considering his past and his narrow experience of humanity. However, deep down, his need to increase his power and usher in a new world of his preference reflects the confusion and anger that was thrust upon him when he was brought into the world. His entire life there was nothing but anger and the pursuit of power. His strength and his identity were inseparably linked, and so, although he believes the creation of this new, powerful world is what he wants, it is merely the influence of his former master's will, imprinted so deeply within him that he can't see that his plan will not bring about a just and perfect world, but will only turn him into the thing that he truly hates. During the time that Mewtwo was living as a slave, a young Pokémon trainer was making his way across the Kanto region on his own journey to find his purpose and become the most powerful of his kind. Much like Mewtwo, Ash Ketchum desires power, but he strives to achieve it not through domination and destruction, but by building trust and friendship between himself and his Pokémon. He sees the value in these creatures not because of their power or lack of it, but because he understands that every creature, whether human or Pokémon, is unique, and a team built on trust and cooperation has the potential to be stronger than a team based around a servant-master dynamic. Throughout the first series of Pokémon, Ash builds his team and makes a name for himself as a powerful Pokemon trainer. His bond with his team of Pokemon is strong and ever growing as they travel together as a team. Just after the opening credits, Ash receives a mysterious invitation to meet the world's most powerful Pokemon master. Of course, Ash can't simply deny this opportunity, and so, driven partly by his ego and partly by his curiosity, he accepts. And along with his Pokemon and human companions Brock and Misty, he makes his way to the harbour from which they will depart to New Island. A large number of very powerful Pokemon trainers have gathered at the harbour, all having received the same mysterious invitation. Unfortunately, when they arrive, there is a fierce storm raging outside, making it unsafe for boats to travel to New Island. Not being the type to shy away from a challenge, most of the Pokemon trainers waiting at the harbour use their Pokemon to swim or fly to the island. Ash, it turns out, does not have any Pokemon he wishes to risk doing this, as although his Squirtle is very powerful, he does not want to risk its safety in the dangerous storm. Fortunately for Ash and friends, there is one boat that is willing to take them. It's manned by Vikings, which seems quite strange, and it has a Meowth duct taped to the front. Clearly this is Team Rocket, but somehow nobody seems to notice. Team Rocket had intercepted Ash's invitation to New Island earlier and decided they should get there themselves, as there's probably going to be some very powerful Pokemon that they can steal. As you would expect, their plan does not work out and the storm is too much for their little boat to handle. They capsize and Ash's Squirtle teams up with Misty's Staryu to work together and get the team to the safety of New Island. When they arrive, an oddly familiar looking host greets them and sends them into the fortress to meet her master. Here, Mewtwo reveals himself to the trainers who are able to make it through the storm. He claims to be the world's most powerful Pokemon master, and the only Pokemon master who is himself a Pokemon. The trainers struggle to comprehend this. How can a Pokemon be a Pokemon master? They decide to battle Mewtwo one by one in an effort to prove that a Pokemon working alone can't be stronger than a human Pokemon team. These strong, seasoned trainers battle, only to be easily defeated by Mewtwo, who revels in demonstrating his power. Mewtwo, having in his mind proven that the subservient relationship between these Pokemon and their trainers causes the Pokemon to be weak, uses his telekinetic abilities to send powerful Pokeballs into the room, which home in and capture all of the Pokemon, stealing them from their trainers and taking them deep into Mewtwo's fortress. Any rational person would see this as quite evil, and far worse for the Pokemon that he captured than life with their trainers. But to Mewtwo, all humans are evil, and by taking their Pokemon away, he believes he is doing what is right for them, even if they don't understand it or want it. All of the Pokemon who travelled here with their trainers are captured, crying out in fear. And finally, a Pokeball approaches Pikachu. From the very beginning of the series, we see that Pikachu, unlike most Pokemon, is afraid of being inside a Pokeball, and so stays permanently outside one, living alongside Ash as his friend and partner. He runs for it, making a dangerous dash up the spiral ramp into the upper portion of Mewtwo's fortress, and Ash follows, determined to save his friend. Even as the inevitable happens and Pikachu is captured and forced into the Pokeball, Ash does not give up. He grabs hold of it and refuses to let go, not knowing where it will take him or what dangers lie there. Ash and Pikachu are taken deeper into the fortress, and we see that the Pokemon are being forced into a machine that scans their DNA in order to create clones. These clones are born with the same anger and confusion as Mewtwo, holding disdain for their naturally born counterparts. Mewtwo has created them to fulfill his goal of creating a new world where only the strong can survive under his rule. He believes that by creating these creatures in the same way that he was created, they will hold the same beliefs and possess the same superior power when compared to those from which they were made. As Pikachu's Pokeball reaches the cloning machine with Ash still holding tightly onto it, His DNA is copied and cloned. However, in order to save his friend, Ash wrestles with the machine to force Pikachu out of it. He manages this, and the Pokeball, having already completed its task of copying Pikachu's DNA, opens, letting Pikachu go free. Now, having stolen and made copies of every Pokemon on New Island, Mewtwo begins his ultimate proof that he, along with his creations, are superior to all others. The clone Pokemon will battle their non-clone twins to the death. It's clear that the natural-born Pokemon don't want to fight their clone counterparts, but the clones, born with the same anger as Mewtwo, attack. The scene is tragic. We see the naturally born Pokemon fight defensively and only try to end the fight, while Mewtwo's clones fight to kill, unwilling to stop until they collapse from exhaustion. While this happens, Mew, who had been watching from the sidelines throughout the movie, confronts Mewtwo, and they begin their showdown. This causes destruction to all in their path as they fight to prove once and for all which of them is truly the more powerful. Ash, who had been blown clear of the battlefield, sees the fighting and rushes to Pikachu's aid, seeing that he has refused to fight and is being mercilessly attacked. Throughout this scene, we see that although the clone Pokemon were born with Mewtwo's anger and his perceived greater power, they are unable to decisively defeat their counterparts. This leads to a stalemate between the Pokemon as we see many of them unable to fight on, falling simultaneously as they pass out. Mewtwo, it seems, has failed to prove that his Pokemon are the more powerful breed, despite their genetic and emotional differences. He will not give up his fight with Mew, however. His purpose, identity, and entire existence has been shaped around being the most powerful and superior being. And so he and Mew fight on, causing more and more destruction to their surroundings. Ash, seeing all of the Pokemon suffering for this fight and realizing there can be no winner in a battle like this, screams for them to stop. His voice goes unanswered. Knowing that this fight can only end in the destruction and death of all people and Pokemon on New Island, he stands between Mew and Mewtwo as they launch simultaneous attacks at each other, both hitting Ash directly. The power of these two attacks combined turns Ash into stone. He falls to the ground, dead. Now, here we have a scene that I was aware of as I watched the movie, and I remember finding it really intense when I was young, but I expected for it to have lost some of its intensity as I got older. After all, this is a movie for kids, so I thought it probably wouldn't be as sad as I thought. I was wrong. We see Ash's body turn to stone, and the battleground falls silent. There had been pain, there had been violence, emotional torment, but now there is death. The fighting stops. Pokemon who had moments earlier been locked in mortal combat with their identical counterparts stood still. Pikachu runs to his friend's body and stands over him. He calls out, "Nothing." He shakes him. Nothing. The reality of what has happened begins to set in, and Pikachu, not knowing what else he can do, uses his Thunder Shock attack on Ash's body in a desperate attempt to wake him up. His cries ring out through the silent arena. It's no use. His trainer, his partner, his friend is gone. Pikachu gives up and begins to cry. Mew and Mewtwo have stopped fighting, watching this tragedy unfold. Seeing the power of the friendship between Ash and Pikachu and understanding the crushing weight of that loss, the Pokemon, both natural and clone, shed tears, joining Pikachu in his grief. Now, the theatrical release of this movie doesn't actually explain how this next part works, but the extended release version contains an extra 10 minutes at the start of the movie, and this gives us a slight explanation of what's about to happen. During Mewtwo's development, while he's still basically just a little clone baby, the scientists that are creating him are also trying to bring back to life the lead scientist's daughter who died sometime earlier. Her consciousness is held within a test tube, and she begins to speak to Mewtwo telepathically. During this scene, she explains to Mewtwo a little bit about life, a little bit about Pokemon, what they are, what humans are, why they should work together, but she also explains a legend in which Pokemon tears have the power to give life. She doesn't really give any more detail than that, and shortly after she says this, her consciousness disappears and dies, and then the scientists wipe Mewtwo's memory, so he has no idea that any of this is even possible during the events of the actual theatrical release movie. As the Pokemon cry, their tears join together and float inwards towards Ash. The legend of their power to bring new life is true, and only through the power deep inside all beings and the understanding that love and friendship can achieve power that is unobtainable through hate and anger, Ash's body turns from stone back into flesh and blood, and he is resurrected. Pikachu embraces his friends, and the battle is over. The anger born deep within the clone Pokemon is gone, and they see the power they held all along in love and empathy is worth more than anything they can achieve through anger and violence. Mewtwo, having watched all of this unfold, is shook. This puts into question everything he knows about himself. All his life he had been certain of his superiority, and that it was because of the way that he was made. For years he had known that Pokemon and humans cannot live together except for as master and slave. But here in front of his eyes he can see the very opposite of that. Mewtwo, through his raw strength and anger, has the power to dominate, the power to cause pain and death. No one can defeat him. And yet these Pokemon, which in Mewtwo's mind are inferior to him, have displayed a power that he can never hope to achieve as he is now. Alongside this new confusion, Mewtwo also feels something he's not felt in his entire life: empathy. Seeing the Pokemon that he created display an extraordinary esoteric power makes Mewtwo relate to them on a level higher than just raw strength. If they can understand what it is to possess great power and still care for those weaker than them, then perhaps, deep down, Mewtwo holds this trait as well. If one human is willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to save Pokemon from suffering, then others must also surely care for Pokemon as he does. Mewtwo comes to the realization of a great truth. Born into captivity and used as a slave for experimentation his entire life, Mewtwo had only ever known a small number of humans. The scientists who created him had done so through gene splicing, and as Mewtwo could not consent to this, he considered it to be an act of malice. The scientists then continued to experiment on Mewtwo, causing him great suffering while offering no relief or companionship. They were the masters, and he was the slave. Giovanni had offered Mewtwo salvation, the chance to understand himself. He led Mewtwo on to believe that his true purpose was noble and in some way would give, when revealed, satisfaction that good would come out of his hardship. Once again, Mewtwo was the slave to a human master, and when he finally demanded to know the true purpose that Giovanni had been keeping from him, he learned that he had been betrayed. Because of his narrow experience with the world, he believed that all humans were like this, and all Pokemon were slaves under their command. He believed that this was human nature, and that being born a human instills an inherent cruelty and evil. As well as this, Mewtwo believes that naturally born Pokemon are subservient by nature, and so he has tried to fix this problem by creating his clones. He has spent his life believing that your identity, your purpose, who you are, is defined by the circumstances of your birth, and that only by changing the way that life is created can you change the world for the better. Seeing Ash's sacrifice changed this in Mewtwo. It made him doubt his long-held belief as he was seeing evidence to the contrary before his eyes. Then, as not only the natural-born Pokémon, but the clones created in opposition to them mourn his passing and choose to put aside their hatred and come together in harmony, Mewtwo sees a truth that has eluded him for his entire life.
I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are.
Mewtwo's profound realization and message at the end of the film is something that I think we can all relate to. As a child watching this movie, I remember thinking about this line a lot. I wasn't constantly wandering around analysing the meaning behind it, but from time to time a situation would come up and I would remember that line. All of this brings me back to my question at the start of the video. When did you become you? And what makes you, you? The answer is hard to find and difficult to comprehend. There is no time when you became you, because what makes you is a collection of experiences and actions. Every day you collect more of these experiences, perform more actions, and make more choices that impact your life. You have always been you, and at the same time, you have never been the you that you are now until this very moment. And you'll never be this version of you again. You can only be a new, altered version of yourself. However slight the alterations, for better or for worse, you will always change, and you have the power to influence that change through the decisions you make and the actions you take in your life. As Mewtwo takes his leave, he understands that his birth and troubled past does not make him who he is, and he has the power to change himself for the better. He abandons his plan to dominate, and in doing so, he is finally free of his previous life as a slave to Giovanni. He sets off to a land as yet unknown, along with his clones, in the hopes that they will start anew with the goal of living peacefully and happily together in harmony with the rest of the world. The trainers and their Pokémon are teleported back to the harbour where they initially departed to New Island, and their memories are wiped. They will continue their journeys through their lives, growing up as individuals and forging their own paths. Thank you for watching or listening to me talk about a kids movie from the 90s. I do appreciate it a lot, and I'd love to know what you think about the message within Mewtwo's realization. So leave a comment, drop me a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you are not already. Have a great day. See you next time.